The Legend of Zelda. It's one of the greatest gaming series of all time, considered by many, and there's very little that really hasn't been said about the series. However, there is seem to be one major flaw with the series, and that is it has a very, very confusing timeline. Unlike other Nintendo series such as Mario that basically have no timeline whatsoever and just go by game basis, or certain series like Star Fox that certainly goes linearly or has a very straightforward in terms of its story. Legend of Zelda has a very odd timeline because basically there is no timeline, yet there are tons of games that reference each other in sort of a historical context. Now, as many people probably know, James Rolfe, aka the AVGN, has made a chronologically confused Zelda rant, even though it's not much of a rant, he's more explaining about a certain subject in particular. Now, after just watching this video, I just wanted to state my own opinions on The Legend of Zelda, state a few things he left out, and state my opinions on the possible next Zelda game which was supposed to be announced. Now, before we begin, there are a few things I would like to state. One, I am not an expert on the Zelda games in particular. There are many games that I haven't played, particularly the handheld games, such as Oracle of Time and Oracle of Seasons. So I don't really claim to know everything about the series in particular or every single nuance. Just the games that I've played are basically the console Zelda games besides Zelda 2. Second of all, these are my opinions! I know Big Al, 2K6 Darkness, The Curse, etc. always have problems with these sorts of things, so I figured I'd get the disclaimer out of the way and just get that stated. That's not to say you can't post your own opinions, in comments or video responses. I'd very much welcome that, because it's always a good debate on the actual Zelda timeline whenever it gets discussed. Besides, without any comments or reviews, I feel like I'm talking to a brick wall. After all, I don't want the Big Al video to be the only video ever make that ever gets comments, so post away or make a video or something. Now, let's get the discussion going on the Zelda timeline in general. As many games have shown, there is really no way to accurately say where each and every Zelda game goes. Games such as the original Legend of Zelda or Twilight Princess really have no sort of, hints as to where they might really possibly go. You can just sort of pick and choose in certain spots. So you can put a game in separate places and you could still technically be right. On the whole, the only games that I feel that have a genuine spot are the Wind Waker and its subsequent sequel, the Phantom Hourglass, are clearly at the end. I just think that's become quite apparent based on how nothing has ever referenced Wind Waker or Phantom Hourglass, at least not to date. Who knows, something could come and that could utterly screw everyone over. So now that I've gotten the Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass as the end out of the way, the middle you could very much pick and choose, with some exceptions of, sequels such as Zelda 2 being a sequel to Legend of Zelda, where it's apparent where it goes in a general sense. Let's see, in the middle, again, you can pick and choose. The one thing I'm going to get flamed over, I do not think the Minish Cap is the first game. I have played it a little bit, not in a big extent, but I don't feel that's the first game. Mostly because there are no games yet that specifically reference Minish Cap in particular. I've heard the theories of it being, it's where Link gets his hat, and its geography is very similar to Ocarina of Time and so forth, but that could just be a number of things. Then the hat, in my opinion, has no real significance. It's just what Link wears. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, it's just what Link wears. It's like Mario's hat. Technically it's a graphical limitation on the old Donkey Kong game, but I digress. It's just kind of what Mario wears. It doesn't necessarily need to have an explanation or have an explanation that is of any particular importance. So I just don't feel how that really puts it in front. Oh, it's where Link gets his hat. The hat means nothing. We saw the Kokiris in Ocarina of Time wearing it. They're all descendants of the first Link in Minish Cap. So that's just my thoughts on Minish Cap being the first. I have heard the arguments, and you can technically be right and still believe that, but that's just not what I really think. For that reason in particular, the reason stated, I feel, don't particularly put it in as the first game in the entire series. So that basically, as you could probably assume that, I believe the first game in the series is Ocarina of Time. Um, my main reason for this is that is the most referenced Zelda game out of all Zelda games. I mean, let's see, Wind Waker mentions it, Twilight Princess mentions it, Majora's Mask is a direct sequel to it. Even A Link to the Past, a game that came before Ocarina of Time was released, mentions it vaguely. I mean, they talk about Ganondorf turning into Ganon and the hero of time and the Seven Sages, even though I guess technically they were called the Seven Wise Men in that game, but it's basically the single most referenced to Zelda game, and Ocarina of Time alone does not have any references to any other games, at least not that I know of. I'm sure someone found a small little detail that references another Zelda game that I just happened to miss. Well, that's just my main reason for thinking Ocarina of Time is the first game. So that would make this game the Legends of all the Legends, if you want to put it in that particular light. I mean, every Zelda game that has a mention of other Zelda games generally tends to do Ocarina of Time. I know planning the beginning before you make an actual game, A Link to the Past, would, like James Rolfe said, be pulling a George Lucas. But again, it has no mention of other Zelda games as far as I know, and it's the most referenced to. So this would, I believe that basically solidifies it being the first game in the series in terms of timeline. So I think Ocarina of Time has to be the first one, because how could there be anything really before it? Because you can't have Ganondorf. We saw Ganondorf transform into Ganon and the whole legend thing begin. The only thing you could possibly do is, beginning of Hyrule with the gods and goddesses and so on and so forth. That's not to say nothing could ever come before, and again, the Minish Cap has some following to where it's the first game, and not to say another game couldn't come and, replace it as the first game, although, like I said, we saw Ganondorf in his original form and then transform into Ganon for the first time. I mean, I fail to see how there could be much of anything before it in terms of a logistics standpoint. Like, maybe I just need to play more of Minish Cap to get that point of view, but I mean, is just the origin story seemingly of everything, because it goes into greater detail on how Hyrule was formed than A Link to the Past did. I just want to make a quick note on the whole splittis theory. I don't know if it's much of a theory, but the idea that the game splits. I don't particularly think that, because I think it would get much too confusing at that point. The only place I think it really could split is if you did this whole separate arc from Ocarina of Time where you follow the path of Adult Link killing Ganon and then the Majora's Mask past that route. So I just don't. It would, in my opinion, would just get way too confusing. And I just think it's rather ludicrous to do a whole split thing, because then you're just, pretty much fucking with every fan in the game. But that's just my thoughts on the split theory. So those are just my general thoughts on the Zelda timeline as a whole.